In her recent article, Why I Am Now a Christian, Ayaan Hirsi Ali quoted a very common line often attributed to G.K. Chesterton, which she employed to warn us against particularly woke agendas. The God hole, as she puts it, left by the retreat of the church, has merely been filled by a jumble of irrational quasi-religious dogma. This, she insists, has turned the words of Chesterton into a prophecy. When men choose not to believe in God, they do not thereafter believe in nothing. They then become capable of believing in anything. This quote is very popular among theists, and so it deserves a response, and whenever I hear this line, I'm reminded of Isaac Asimov's perspective, and so let's hear his wisdom.
If God is dead, everything is permitted. That's what scares them.
Well, on the contrary, that assumes that human beings have no feeling about what is right and wrong.
Now that is a subtle and brilliant insight. Asimov has highlighted that this perspective, this quote, presupposes the absence of a moral framework without belief, specifically belief in a supreme being. Chesterton's assertion implies that belief in God provides a moral framework and basis for discerning truth. Without this, he insists, we can, and indeed will, believe anything. But here's the thing. Most theists, including those that express this prophecy, will attribute the good deeds and moral acts of atheists to the supposed fact that we have goodness written on our hearts by God. Put another way, most theists claim that when atheists act morally, we're acting according to God's moral laws. We just don't know it. But as Asimov has highlighted, there's tension here. If, as Chesterton's words entail, morality is a product of what we believe, then trivially, atheists can believe anything. But if morality is written on our heart, if it's within us, then trivially we can't believe in anything because we're already subconsciously committed to a standard of good. No matter what we believe, we can't contradict the laws on our heart. So which is it? Theists can't say that atheists are moral because we unknowingly embody God's moral laws, but also say that atheists believe in any moral thing. Pick a lane, choose a platitude.
Is the only reason you are virtuous because that's your ticket to heaven? Is the only reason you don't beat your children to death because you don't want to go to hell? It seems to me that it's insulting to human beings to imply that only a system of rewards and punishments can keep you a decent human being.
Indeed, do we need to believe in divine repercussions in order to be moral? Is this really a prerequisite? Are we good simply because we don't want to suffer consequences when we die? Are we really this selfish, with all our acts of benevolence being, at bedrock, nothing more than self-preservation? Because if the answer is no, that is, if we give to charity and help our neighbours not because we fear hell or desire heaven, but because it's good in its own right, however we want to cash that out, then Chesterton's words are bullshit.
Isn't it conceivable a person wants to be a decent human being because that way he feels better, because that way the world is better?
Precisely. The only type of morality, if you want to even call it that, that's available to the theist but not the atheist, is a belief in a divine dictator that will punish you. The internal sense of morality that we all have isn't dependent on whether we're convinced of the existence of an unembodied, all-powerful, all-knowing mind, and to suggest otherwise is to insult humanity. To give you just one naturalistic explanation of our moral intuitions, we are a social species, which is to say that we evolved in groups, and protecting our tribe is something that's very much been selected for. Hence, our moral intuition to love our neighbour and even sacrifice ourselves for the betterment of our community is wired into us. Just as a bee is almost certainly not conscious of the fact that it's been refined by evolution to sacrifice itself for the hive, we too are not conscious of this fact, and hence we tend to arrive at this truth through an abstract and religious prism, and only then, if at all, are able to make sense of what's really going on once we have access to adequate information.
I would like to think, I don't believe that I'm ever going to heaven or hell. I think that when I die, there will be nothingness. That's what I firmly believe. That does not mean that I have the impulse to go out and rob and steal and rape and everything else because I don't fear punishment. For one thing, I fear worldly punishment. And for a second thing, I fear the punishment of my own conscience. I have a conscience. It doesn't depend on religion. and I think it's so with other people too.
Amen, Asimov. The punishment of our own conscience is the engine of our ethics, and this is a point that's been emphasised by countless brilliant minds like Asimov over the years. You might be able to escape societal punishment, but you can't escape your conscience. And there are many ways to make sense of our conscience, including the evolutionary framework I offered a minute ago. What's more, Asimov acknowledges that ethical behaviour is influenced by societal laws. Theists act in certain ways to avoid the wrath of God, while both theists and atheists act to avoid the wrath of our community. In society, everyone doesn't have the same views. This is partly why there's so much animosity, and yet we obey the laws of our land because of the punishment we receive if we break them. Our conscience is the substrate of morality, and societal laws are the ground floor. Whether or not we are convinced of virgin births, fine-tuning arguments, or the divine in general is irrelevant. As said at the beginning, most theists know this, and that's why they say that atheists are good, because they have morality written on their hearts. Belief isn't a necessary condition.
Besides, even in societies in which religion is very powerful, there's no shortage of crime and sin and misery and terrible things happening despite heaven and hell.
This is another fantastic point that relates to the meagre moral fruits argument, an argument that challenges the assumption that higher levels of religious belief correlate with superior moral behaviour. By claiming that without belief in God we become capable of believing anything, Chesterton's words affirm the theological premise of the meagre moral fruits argument. He and other proponents are committed to the claim that theists, on average, are more moral than atheists, since, unlike the theist who believes in God's laws, the atheist apparently can believe in anything. Now, defining what is and isn't moral is notoriously difficult, but if we judge according to political rights, civil liberties, freedom of expression, rule of law, and access to justice, countries that have a greater percentage of theists do not morally outperform countries that have a greater percentage of atheists. And when it comes to equality, religious institutions and people have been and still are a major obstacle. And what Asimov is emphasising is that the distinct lack of moral brilliance in highly theistic countries exposes the fact that Chesterton is wrong in his claim. What we believe isn't, in fact, the cornerstone of our morality. No, as Asimov has expressed, our conscience is all we need.
I mean, I imagine if you go down death row, a bunch of murderers maybe who are waiting for execution, and ask them if they believe in God. They'll tell you yes.
So there we have it. Long before Ali championed Chesterton's words, Asimov had already pinpointed the shortcomings of this self-righteous assertion. This prophecy stands in stark contrast to the widespread theistic belief that atheists too act in moral ways because morality is inherently inscribed on everyone's heart, regardless of whether they believe in God. Moreover, the reality, as highlighted by the meagre moral fruits argument, does not support such a claim. It's evident that our moral compass is not dependent on religious belief, but is deeply rooted in our conscience, a part of ourselves of which we are often unaware. Ironically, then, it is those that endorse this quote from Chesterton that will believe anything.